In a small village at the edge of the dense Ofari forest, the air was thick with the scent of rain, as if the clouds were conspiring to pour down any moment. Here lived Kito, a man notorious for his quick hands and smooth tongue. Kito had a reputation, a skill for pilfering small things unnoticed, a coin here, a piece of jewelry there. He was neither brave nor particularly loyal, and his interest in the other villagers extended only as far as he could benefit. But Kito had dreams beyond mere survival. He longed for riches that would make him a king in this land, feared and respected by all. One night, as the moon cast a pale light over the village, Kito received a visit from a stranger. The man introduced himself as Masimba, a tall, muscular figure cloaked in shadows. He was known to be one of the most feared bandits in the neighboring region and had no time for idle chatter. "Kito," he began, his voice a rough whisper, "I know of a place where wealth lies unguarded. Riches to fill your heart, coins to buy your way out of this wretched life." Kito's eyes glimmered with excitement, and he leaned in, listening closely. Masimba told him about a trading caravan passing near Ofari forest. It carried the goods of a powerful merchant, precious fabrics and beads from the north, spices from the east, and most importantly, a box of rare jewels, sapphires and emeralds that were worth a fortune. "There's a catch," Masimba said, crossing his arms. "The merchant is shrewd and has hired the village warriors to guard his caravan. But we can outsmart them. I've planned every detail." The plan was simple. Masimba and Kito would ambush the caravan at a narrow pass where the forest path was at its darkest, blocked by large, moss-covered boulders that slowed travelers to a crawl. Masimba would create a distraction to draw the guards away, while Kito would sneak in to seize the jewels. They would meet later to split the spoils. Kito barely slept that night. His mind raced, weaving images of a future where he could buy himself out of his reputation as a petty thief and become someone powerful. He imagined gold coins spilling from his pockets, women admiring him, the village elders finally showing him the respect he'd long craved. On the appointed night, Kito and Masimba set out under a moonless sky, the silence of the forest broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustle of small animals hidden in the undergrowth. As they approached the narrow pass, Masimba motioned for Kito to stay back while he scouted the area. From their hiding place among the tall grass, Kito could see the faint glow of torches in the distance. The caravan was close. Masimba gestured for Kito to move into position behind the boulders. Kito's heart pounded as he crouched low, creeping toward the edge of the path where the caravan would pass. He clutched his knife, slick with sweat, ready to strike. Moments later, the first carriage, drawn by a pair of oxen, rumbled past, followed by 3 guards in leather armor and armed with long spears. Kito's hands shook as he tightened his grip on his knife. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the trees, Masimba's signal. He had knocked over a massive tree trunk, which rolled down the slope, scattering the guards in confusion. 2 of the guards raced back to investigate, while the third remained with the caravan, his eyes darting around the darkness. Kito saw his opportunity. He slid into the shadows and moved swiftly toward the last carriage, where Masimba had told him the jewels would be kept. The guard turned for a split second, distracted by the commotion, and Kito used the moment to crawl beneath the wagon. His fingers found the wooden box they had spoken of, the lock already broken as Masimba had promised. As he opened the box, his eyes widened. Inside was not a treasure but a pile of rocks wrapped in cloth. His stomach dropped, realizing they had been tricked. Before he could process what had happened, a hand clamped down on his shoulder. Kito whipped around, his knife flashing, but it was Masimba's face that stared back at him, a cruel smile spreading across his lips. Surprised, Masimba chuckled. "Oh, Kito, did you really think I'd share my fortune with a small-time thief like you?" The remaining guards returned, drawn by the sudden noise, their torches casting flickering light over the 2 men. Masimba released Kito with a shove, melting into the shadows as quickly as he'd come. Kito stood frozen, the guards closing in, their faces grim. The guards circled Kito, their faces shadowed and stern, their torches casting flickering halos of light around them. Kito's heart raced as he gripped his small knife, though he knew it was useless against their long, sharp spears. His mind whirled with panic, desperately seeking a way out of the trap Masimba had so cleverly set. "Drop the weapon, thief," one of the guards commanded, his voice low and dangerous. Kito looked around, but there was no escape. Behind him lay the dense forest, and in every other direction, the guard stood ready to pounce. Realizing he had no other choice, Kito dropped his knife, its metallic clang echoing in the silence. The guards wasted no time, they seized him roughly by the arms and bound his wrists with thick rope. "Thought you could rob Master Ekin's caravan, did you?" one of them sneered as he tightened the knots. Kito winced as the rough rope dug into his skin, but he kept silent, his mind still racing. Master Ekin, the merchant whose caravan they'd ambushed, was known far and wide for his wealth and his ruthlessness. His goods traveled across villages and kingdoms, guided by well-paid mercenaries who had a reputation for punishing thieves without mercy. Ekin's name alone struck fear into the hearts of many, for he was a man who tolerated no disrespect. Kito was led to a small clearing where the other guards were gathered, their faces tense and suspicious. In the center of the gathering, on a high wooden carriage laden with exotic goods, sat Master Ekin himself, draped in fine silks and adorned with rings that glinted in the torchlight. He was a short, stocky man with a thick beard and sharp eyes that seemed to pierce straight into Kito's soul. Well, Ekin said, his voice a slow, ominous drawl. "What do we have here?" "A thief, caught red-handed." He leaned forward, his gaze never wavering as he examined Kito from head to toe. Kito, his mind racing, thought quickly. If there was one thing he was good at, it was talking his way out of trouble, or at least trying to. He took a deep breath and mustered his most convincing tone. "Master Ekin, I am no thief," he said, his voice pleading. "I am a victim, just as you are. There was a man, a stranger, dangerous and cunning. He tricked me, led me here, and betrayed me. I swear, I had no idea this was a setup." The guards exchanged skeptical glances, but Ekin's sharp eyes remained fixed on Kito. There was a moment of tense silence as the merchant considered his captive, assessing his words with an intensity that made Kito's skin crawl. "Do you think me a fool, thief?" Ekin's voice was calm but laced with menace. "I know the ways of men like you. First, you beg and plead, then, you spin tales of innocence." He sighed, almost in disappointment. "Why should I believe you?" Kito's heart sank, but he saw an opportunity. He knew he had to turn the tables, to make his words so compelling that they'd question their judgment. "Because," Kito said, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper, "if you kill me now, you'll never find the real thief, the one who plotted to rob you and vanish with the riches." He looked straight into Ekin's eyes, feigning a confidence he didn't feel. "This man is no common bandit, he is Masimba, a dangerous outlaw feared across many lands. He's the one you want, not me. I can help you catch him." Ekin raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. He had heard of Masimba, a man with a reputation for brutality and cunning, a man who evaded capture time and again. If Kito's story had even a grain of truth, then Ekin's interest was piqued. For if anyone could capture Masimba, the elusive bandit, and bring him to justice, it would be Master Ekin. The merchant's gaze narrowed, calculating, as he pondered the possibilities. "Why would Masimba choose a scrawny thief like you as an accomplice?" Ekin asked, testing him. Kito swallowed hard, realizing this was his chance to convince them all. Because he needed a decoy, someone to be left behind while he made his escape, Kito replied, his voice steady. "Masimba is clever, he knows how to cover his tracks, to use others as pawns in his schemes. But I know his ways. I can help you find him, bring him to justice." The guards murmured amongst themselves, unsure of what to believe. Ikin leaned back, drumming his fingers on the side of the carriage. His gaze remained locked on Kito, sharp and calculating. "Very well," Ikin finally said, a dangerous glint in his eye. "You shall have your chance to prove your innocence, but make no mistake, this is your one chance. Betray me, and your life will end with a blade to the throat." Kito nodded eagerly, relief washing over him. He had bought himself some time, but he knew that he was far from safe. Ikin's word was as ironclad as his reputation, and the merchant's patience was limited. Ikin ordered his men to release Kito's bindings, though they kept a close eye on him, ready to strike at the first sign of betrayal. Kito rubbed his wrist, glancing nervously at the guards surrounding him, knowing that he was now under the watch of men who would kill him without hesitation. The caravan continued through the night, traveling deeper into the forest where the terrain was treacherous, twisted by gnarled roots and thick underbrush. Kito knew that somewhere in the darkness, Masimba was watching, aware that his pawn had been captured. The thrill of the chase had only begun, and the stakes had grown far higher than either man had anticipated. But as dawn approached, Kito's mind was filled with thoughts of escape and survival. He knew he had to keep Ikin's interest long enough to devise a plan to save his own skin, and if he could somehow outwit Masimba, he might even find a way to turn the tables entirely. The only question was, could he survive long enough to make his move? Tika seemed convinced enough to keep Kito alive. But Kito knew his time was running out. He had made a dangerous enemy in Masimba, and the only way to survive was to somehow outmaneuver both the bandit and Ikin. As the sun dipped below the horizon on the fourth night, casting an eerie glow over the forest, Kito finally saw his chance. Ikin had called for the caravan to rest near a small clearing by a river, and the guards were distracted, setting up camp and tending to the oxen. Kito took a deep breath and approached Ikin, who sat on a fallen log, sharpening a dagger in the firelight. "Master Ikin," Kito began, choosing his words carefully, "I know where Masimba will strike." Ikin raised an eyebrow, still focused on the dagger. "Do you now?" he asked, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Yes," Kito said confidently, gesturing to the north. "There's a narrow pass just beyond the river, surrounded by cliffs. It's the perfect place for an ambush, no escape routes, no cover. Masimba is cunning, but he is also predictable. He'll be there." Ikin's eyes narrowed as he listened, and after a moment, he nodded. "Very well, Kito," he said, sheathing the dagger. "Lead us there. But if this is a trick, I will leave you here for Masimba to find, and he will not be merciful." Kito felt a chill run down his spine but managed to maintain his composure. He nodded and led the caravan forward, deeper into the shadows of the forest, toward the cliffs. His plan was risky, but it was the only way out. He knew Masimba's patterns, his arrogance, and his desire for revenge. If Kito could bait him into one final confrontation, perhaps he could play both sides and walk away free. They reached the pass at dawn, a narrow pathway flanked by towering cliffs on both sides. The caravan came to a halt, and the guards took up positions along the pass, their eyes scanning the rocky terrain for any sign of movement. The air was thick with tension as everyone waited in silence, anticipating an ambush. Moments later, a shrill whistle echoed through the canyon. Kito's heart pounded. It was Masimba's signal, the call he used to summon his band of outlaws. Shadows moved along the cliff edges, and suddenly, Masimba's men appeared, blocking the path forward and back. They were armed and fierce, with eyes that glinted with menace as they stared down at the caravan below. "Ikin!" Masimba's voice boomed from above. He stepped forward, his tall figure silhouetted against the morning light, his face twisted in a smile that was equal parts amusement and rage. I didn't expect to find you here so soon. And I see you brought my old friend Kito. How thoughtful. Ikin's expression remained unreadable as he looked up at the bandit. Masimba, he said coldly, you have meddled in my affairs for the last time. Oh, it's you who meddled in mine, Masimba replied, his gaze shifting to Kito. And you, Kito? Did you think you could betray me and walk away unscathed? Kito felt his mouth go dry. He had hoped that Masimba would focus his anger on Ikin, but now he realized the extent of the bandit's wrath. Masimba had no intention of letting him go, and Ikin would just as soon leave him to his fate. Masimba, we don't need to do this, Kito called out, trying to sound brave. There's enough here for everyone. We can all walk away richer. Masimba laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. You've always been a fool, Kito. I don't want riches, I want revenge. He signaled to his men, and suddenly, rocks tumbled down from the cliffside, a rain of stones crashing into the caravan below. Ikin's guards shouted, scrambling for cover as Masimba's bandits closed in, leaping down from the cliffs, swords flashing in the early morning light. The pass erupted in chaos. Kito ducked behind a boulder as Ikin's guards clashed with Masimba's men, the sounds of clanging metal and shouts filling the air. He watched as Masimba cut through Ikin's men with terrifying precision, his movement swift and deadly. In the midst of the melee, Ikin confronted Masimba, his dagger drawn. The two men circled each other, each waiting for the other to make a move. Ikin, you've been a thorn in my side for too long, Masimba, Ikin spat, his voice steady. Likewise, Masimba replied, lunging forward with a fierce strike. The two clashed, their blades ringing out as they fought. Masimba's strength was undeniable, but Ikin's movements were calculated, each step measured. It was a battle of brute force against precision, and neither seemed willing to give an inch. Kito, watching from his hiding place, saw his chance. Both Masimba and Ikin were distracted, focused solely on each other. He slipped quietly toward the edge of the caravan, where the wooden box containing Ikin's most precious cargo lay unguarded. He opened it with trembling hands and stared at the pile of jewels within, sapphires, emeralds, rubies, enough wealth to make him a king. But just as he reached for the jewels, a shadow loomed over him. He looked up to see Masimba, his face twisted with rage. Did you really think you could get away from me, Kito? Masimba snarled. Kito scrambled backward, his mind racing. Masimba, listen. We can split it. Just the two of us, we don't need Ikin. But Masimba shook his head. You've already betrayed me once. I don't make the same mistake twice. He raised his sword, ready to strike, but in that moment, Ikin appeared behind him, his dagger flashing. With a swift, silent move, Ikin plunged the dagger into Masimba's side, the blade sinking deep. Masimba gasped, his eyes widening in shock, and he staggered back, clutching his wound. Ikin looked down at Masimba, his face cold. No one crosses me, Masimba, he said, his voice barely a whisper. With one last look of hatred, Masimba collapsed to the ground, the life draining from his eyes. Ikin turned to Kito, his gaze as sharp as ever. And you, Kito, he said, his voice low. Did you really think I wouldn't notice your attempts to play both sides? Kito backed away, fear gripping him. He opened his mouth to speak, to plead for his life, but Ikin silenced him with a raised hand. I could kill you here and now, Ikin said, his tone deadly. But I think a man like you deserves a different fate. With a wave of his hand, Ikin called over his guards, who seized Kito and dragged him to his knees. Ikin's expression softened, almost pitying. I'm leaving you here, Kito, he said. With nothing. No jewels, no allies, no reputation. And if you ever cross my path again, I will make sure it's the last thing you ever do. With that, Ikin turned, leaving Kito in the dust as the caravan moved on, the jewels and riches he'd once dreamed of disappearing into the distance. As the sun rose over the forest, Kito was left alone, bruised and humiliated, with nothing but the knowledge of his own failure. And so, Kito wandered into the forest, haunted by the echoes of his greed and betrayal.